Joana, the co-host of this podcast, where we visit exhibitions so that you have to. And we're so glad to be in your presence. This is the first episode of season 2, where we'll just go back and share our thoughts and our feelings about the first season, and where we'll dig a bit deeper into the reasons why we do this. So, this is going to be a conversation between Emily and myself. And it's also a way to introduce this new season that has some really, really fascinating people coming up. Really good episodes.
Yeah, exactly. We're doing a little bit of the recap that you get on Netflix when you're watching a show, right? It's like a little bit of a look back of what happened in the first season, some light touch remembrances, but you're not going to skip over this. This is one not to miss. So we'll kind of ease in, as Joanna mentioned, and share some thoughts on the previous season, some of the things that have been lingering in our minds, and a bit of an origin story for how and why this all began.
I'm really looking forward to asking you a few questions, Emily, because
Same.
sometimes we're so busy and we're so like, what should we do? Have you done the research on this? And we go over our scripts, and actually, we didn't really ask ourselves the tough questions or the pleasurable questions. So maybe I will throw in the first question now. What do you think?
Let's do it.
I'm really curious, Emily. What did you think when I asked you to do this podcast with me? What was like your immediate gut reaction?
Yeah, my immediate reaction was a very easy yes. I mean, I actually remember where I was when I got the text message from you, which, it's great that it was a text message. Hey, let's do an arts podcast. I was in my living room. My sister was visiting. I announced to the room, Joanna wants to do an arts podcast together. And both Peter and Molly were like, cool, do it. And I mean, I think there was a vast underappreciation of the amount of time that it would take. There was that, definitely, which was part of what made it easy. So delusion played a part, but also I think, look, we've known each other a long time. It has always been one of the great joys of my life to, go and see exhibitions with you and chat with you about them and see some of it through your eyes and still have my own distinct experience. That has been wonderful. So it felt like a very natural extension of that. The art world, as we know, is not my expertise, and it is your expertise, and you have a great way of inviting people in. You've had a great way of inviting me in, I should say, and I liked the idea of sharing that experience with other people. I mean, I know that there's a lot of folks who listen to this podcast who are steeped in the art world as you are, but I like the notion of making those barriers between regular person, regular Jane, and the art world, making those more porous and, making, people feel welcome as I feel more welcome, the more I know about the place and, kind of the ins and outs of.
So what I want to say here is, yes, you were outside of the art world, but you already had something that made you go to exhibitions, and you have that ability to not only experience them but also be able to connect them to real feelings, real experiences. So you're not just coming as a complete sort of null entity that knows nothing, feels nothing, knew nothing. And, so you already had, that's why I invited you to do this. There's already you had a foot in there, like firmly
so. Yeah, totally. There was already, a relationship and a fascination built for sure, of going to exhibitions. But I mean, I guess so. A follow-up question to you, Joanna, is why did you want to start this podcast, and why do you think it would be a good fit for us.
Yes. So I didn't remember about the text message. Now that I'm thinking about it, I was like, wow, I texted her rather than calling her and saying, listen, I have an idea and please give me 5 minutes to convince you. Yeah. So about the podcast, I did think about audiences. And first of all, I thought about myself as audience. Emily, by the way, so I was going to say, I listen to podcasts a lot, and I realized the other day that you were the person who introduced me to podcasts.
What?
So what
No
comes
way.
around goes around. Yes, yes, yes.
Nice. Badge of honor right
What
here.
goes around comes around. Badge of honor. I remember you introducing me to This American Life,
Huh.
and in my brain going like, podcasts? What the heck is that?
Yeah, we met in 2012, right? So podcasts
Yes.
were kind of,
Yeah.
it was, I mean, This American Life obviously was a radio show that just turned into a podcast. But yeah, they were
Yeah,
pretty
true.
kind of new then, newer for sure. They weren't the thing they are now.
Well, they were for me, I can tell you that. And ever since then, I listen to podcasts religiously. I love them. And I listen to podcasts about absolutely everything. It really is a lesson to listen to people talk about what they're passionate about. And then I realized that I didn't listen to a lot of podcasts about art and I felt deeply ashamed. So I looked for podcasts about art, started listening to them, and most of them are interviews with artists. And some artists are incredible at talking about their craft, they're just inspiring, others, not so much. And also, the frame of the interviews is always so serious that
Mm.
sometimes you kind of think, oh, okay, I'm going for a run. I never go for runs, but like a hypothetical run that I will never go to. But like, I'm going for a run. I need to listen to something. You are not going to listen to someone talking about post structuralism, to an artist pretending to understand what they mean about that. So I just thought there is nothing out there apart from very few ones. There's the Great Women podcast,
Yeah.
Great Women Artists podcast by Katie Hessel. There's Ben Luke, who's an amazing interviewer, but still always with the same thing of an interview with said person who makes the work. And I thought, that's a problem with contemporary art. And because I work in contemporary art, that's the problem. We make it so inaccessible. We make it so that you have to feel that you understand. It's like you're doing an exam. And a lot of people who don't work in the art world tell me, oh, oh, you work in contemporary art. I don't know anything about contemporary art, but I do appreciate your work, and I'm like, God damn, what are we doing that
Mm.
we are rendering the most amazing of things, which is art, so inaccessible to people. And so I wanted to work on a podcast with someone who would bring me down from my theoretical natural state. The idea was really to have the same thing you have in other areas of art and creativity, which is just two people talking about the art itself rather than kind of getting the same concepts you have in at university in magazines of the specialty, because when you go to your doctor doesn't explain what's wrong with you in medical terms that they would use with their
Mm.
colleagues. They dumb it down for you, but not in a stupid way, in a human way that you can understand and that you can connect to. And we don't do that in contemporary art often enough. So that's why I wanted to do this. And I have to say, putting humility aside, I think we're the only format, or one of the only formats, that does that, that just talks about with passion, with openness, the experience of being in the presence of an artwork and just having the most amazing conversations
Mm.
about it, and having the pleasure to give time to it, and also to be mindful of the fact that you're sharing it with other people, and you have to be understandable and you have to connect to people. So yeah, that's what I wanted. Sorry, I feel like I'm lecturing you for some
No, not at
reason. I'm
all.
looking
You're
at you like really passionately, but I'm lecturing myself and my own field basically.
preach,
So
girl.
that's, yeah.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think, that is, as someone who's spent a lot of time with doctors lately, I wish they did.
Yes.
I wish they did speak in more colloquial terms. But yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And it's like there is just that experience of being in an exhibition that is so unique and so unlike anything else. And often people go there alone, and it's like to have a place to talk about what that experience is like as much as you can. I mean, talking about the experience of art is a bit like maybe dancing about architecture or something. Like, I think your, instinct about going into art through this niche of exhibitions and looking at it through that being the portal to this wider thing is, yeah, is really exciting. And I hope it, yeah, brings people in and makes them feel like they can connect with art in a way that they might not have otherwise.
Nothing gives me more joy than to see people listening to the podcast all over the world, because the exhibition really is an excuse. And we make huge efforts in describing the exhibitions because we realize that most people who listen won't experience those exhibitions. So it really is an excuse to kind of dig into the work of an artist. I have a question for you. I have another
Mm.
one. So maybe because you're not steeped into the art world, I'm really curious, but you went to see exhibitions before. Has any of the experiences we talked about have an impact on your life?
Being quite a casual exhibition goer previously, and now it being a much more regular diet of exhibitions and exhibitions that I would have never gone to, that artists I would have never sought out, and galleries I would have never sought out before. I think one thing that I've really noticed in the hiatus since we last met for the podcast is how much I've missed it. There is, the sense of discovery that they bring, and the sense of there's something about being in a place with other people regarding the same thing. You're not
Mm,
having the same
mm,
experience, but there is something about being in a place where people are regarding things and maybe reflecting on things or experiencing things, in a way that you might not be. And that's so palpable. I don't know that I considered that quite as deeply or as much previous to the podcast, and, kind of acknowledging how enriching that is. There's, this internal processing thing that's happening in a public place with other people. I mean, at Yoko
mm,
Ono, it's like, oh
mm.
my gosh, there's somebody on the floor there in a bag creating their own art. It's like, how cool
Yeah.
is that? It's just something you can't get anywhere else. I mean, I remember the feeling I got when I walked into Zainab Saleh's show at
Mm,
Tate Britain. And it was like
yes.
how overcome with calm I became. I think the second observation about art that I don't think I really fully appreciated before doing the podcast is its healing nature. So
Hmm.
earlier on the year, a friend of mine was splitting from their spouse. And
Oh.
when they told me the news, they were like, okay, well, let's meet at the Wallace Collection. There's painting there that they were like, this just really speaks to me. And I just want to go see it right now because I'm
Hmm.
in a vulnerable
Yeah.
place. I think for me, especially contemporary art, gets couched in a very cerebral place. And,
Mm-hmm.
I think that the experience of going to so many exhibitions in a row has really opened up the much more emotional landscape of them for me. And I think I appreciate that a lot more than I used to. I mean, when I was a more casual goer, I think that I usually left, and I mean, I still do to a certain degree, left with a head full of ideas. But I think now I'm leaving exhibitions with a lot more to feel about, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Do you remember this Ethan Hawke TED Talk that he did during COVID? I liked it. So, not a particularly new idea, but Ethan Hawke had this TED Talk a few years ago about creativity, and says that like the society pushback against art is like, oh, what's the point? Like, what are you going to do with that? Oh, well, it's just Agnes Martin, some
Hmm.
lines on a thing, and like, what's the point? And people who can be dismissive of art can say things like that until a loved one dies, or they have a health scare, or a big professional setback, or something like that. And then they reach for that song or that poem, or that piece in the Wallace
That
collection, or
painting. Mm,
exactly,
mm,
yeah.
mm.
And
Yeah.
then it's those times when we are most vulnerable, and all of that, that we seek it out. And
This idea of healing in art has kind of been on my mind because of the
mm,
famous Maggie Nelson book called On Freedom that I keep yapping about and that I've read a few times now. I mean, there's four texts in it, and the first one it's about the notion of freedom, and the first one is freedom in art. And it's a really, really interesting text and quite thought provoking. And she does say that, the punk, upset the bourgeoisie kind of thing in art has been replaced by this notion of healing. And she quotes Helen Molesworth, who's done the Death of an Artist podcast, and who's a curator, as having written that in Art Forum in 2016, I think. A lot of artists listen to the podcast, and what a pressure to put on an artist's creativity, to have that healing power. And I find myself a bit with Maggie Nelson, although I'm completely with this. I'm working with a lot of artists who are working with the notions of care and notions of healing and notions of balancing out the body and finding out how to be a body rather than being in a body, which there's a big difference, and I
mm,
think a lot of artists are working on it. But this idea of healing and just going to art when you're feeling bad, the child in me goes like, ugh! Because I always drew so much pleasure from art and so much joy and so
mm,
much hope of things not just being what I was seeing them to be. Like, I remember when I was a child in Lisbon and going to the museum and reading, just thinking, okay, I'm so relieved. The world is not just what's in front of
yeah.
me, which is really boring. It's so boring. I'm bored. And I know there's other possibilities out there. So I think there's that as well. There's that of going to the museums and just thinking, huh, you can live in yellow. And yellow
Yeah.
is I remember us talking about blue with Zainab Saleh and just thinking, huh, I never thought about blue so much and colors. And that made me so happy. And that made me so joyful. And I stayed in that thing for a while, of because you kind of bring me into that, because you also made bring me into the feelings more than to the, or connecting feelings with thoughts and making them more enjoyable and full and complex, so yeah, I mean, there's also that, but I do understand. I saw that Ethan Hawke thing on Instagram, and I was just like, thank you, Ethan Hawke, thank you, because I saw these collectors in DC, and they only collect conceptual art. So they have like the most cold, rigid. I mean, I'm not saying that these are not my opinions. This is what their friends tell them. They're like, you have, stuff with words on them on the walls, and and photos and text and lines, and like the coldest of cold, like this mathematical coldness of conceptual art. And they love on Kawara, and on Kawara has these postcards where they just send um, postcards to people, or write or do drawings and paintings with dates on them. And the postcards usually say, there's the date, and it says I'm still alive, or I'm alive. And so the friends of this couple, it's a couple, who started by collecting like the most political expressionist or post-expressionist German art, and went completely the other way. They were telling me that they were in a horrible train accident a few
Oh,
years
wow.
back. Yeah, and they were already elderly at the time. They're quite. I think they're in their 80s now. And so she was okay. She was hurt, but she was okay. He was in a very bad state in hospital. And one day, one of their friends was talking to her, asking how he was doing. And she was saying, we don't know, he's not out of the woods yet. And they looked at her and were like, do you know what? You know that Ankawara pieces you have?
Hmm.
I get them now. I get
Mm.
them. The time, the dates, the
Mm.
marking of being here, this feeling of being here, and the possibility of losing our friend. I get it.
Even if there is, just that fleeting moment of your deepest, darkest time, and you see a piece of art that moves you and consoles you, if that's the only time you've ever seen art, to me, it's like, wow, brilliant, amazing. You've been going to exhibitions professionally for many, many moons, as a curator, as things that you've done yourself, that you are reviewing or interviewing artists or what have you. I mean, is there anything different about the way that you experience exhibitions for the podcast than how you have experienced them in other professional guises?
I was trying to see if you'd skip that question.
Ah,
It's that
it's
that's a
okay if it
difficult one.
doesn't.
That's
Yeah.
no, it's just shameful what I'm going to say. It's just I I have to admit it. Ever since we started the podcasts, I have to say that I have a feeling of reuniting with the excitement and the joy and the depth of experience that I did before I started working in contemporary art. And it's that old thing, isn't it? When you work in the field that you love, that job may kill the love you have for that
Mm,
field. One of the reasons why I wanted to do the podcast is that I travel a lot for work and I spend a lot of time away from London. And I realized that I was missing a lot of shows because when I would come back to London, I'd be like, nope, this is home. I'm an introvert. I love being at home. I have to write quite a lot. So, it was a good excuse not to leave the house,
mhm,
to be with kids and to be, with family and just be in a cozy, nice place and not be challenged again by those artists. And so I realized that I was missing a lot of shows in London. And also, when I went there, I was running and I'd be like, okay, done this, did that, and didn't even look up the artists. And I was falling prey to what I was saying about in the beginning, which is that when you read a book, you're like, oh, who is this Miranda July? Oh, I'm going to look her up. And oh, she lives
mhm,
in California. Oh, she's whatever years old. And she's in her 50s or whatever. And you kind of like, oh, I'm going to listen to an interview of hers. And I wouldn't do that in my own field. I'd be like, no,
mm,
I know more or less. Okay, Nigerian artist in their 30s. Okay, I see more or less. But no, you don't. You know nothing.
mm,
You always have to. I now what I do, even when I'm talking about Agnes Martin, I will always start from the beginning again. And I did that in the beginning. And now with the podcast, I I have that mindfulness of no, you don't know Agnes Martin. I do. I read a lot of books about her. I read a biography, but no, I don't. Go back to the beginning. Dig deep into what interested you in that sense, and go back and reread or rewatch or look again, because you think you know, but you don't. Because art's not about knowing; it's about where you're at in your life. I mean,
mm,
there's books I read to the lighthouse regularly. I love Virginia Woolf is one of my big discoveries when I was a kid. And I reread that all the time. And in the beginning, I would identify with the young painter. And now I'm with the mother, the angel of the house that you supposedly have to kill, according to Virginia Woolf. The main character, the wife, the mother. And you always have to go back. That's the beauty of art. It keeps changing because you keep changing. And you have to bring that into the work as a curator. And I do it with my artists and I do it with my people and my shows and my texts. But
I have to say, I didn't know what you were going to say. Just kind of coming at it from a different angle revives that passion and love and interest. And I love that the podcast is doing that for you. And I think that's such a great,
yes.
kind of thing to remind yourself of, about things that you are passionate about. It's like there are hidden depths, or there are,
Mm.
there's ways of seeing it that will help revive that, that thing that got you into it in the first place.
Is there an episode that surprised you, or that you weren't expecting to do what it did to you, or an exhibition that you were expecting to feel a certain way about and ended up being completely different to what your expectations were?
So many. I mean, where to start, really?
Where to start?
Certainly Marina Abramovic. As I was going in to buy the ticket, suddenly wondering, God, is she going to be? She's not going to be here, is she? Like, she's a performance artist. Like, this is a retrospective of her stuff. Like, how's this going to work? And not considering that at all until the moment I got there. Just thinking about that show. That was such a great show, wasn't it? I mean, just
Yeah,
the
it was a
just
great
the
start.
amount of work she's done, and just the trail she blazed with it, and how the recreation of it. I mean, I just think they did such a fantastic job of making something ephemeral very present and alive in that space. I mean, hats off, RA. My normal go to is like, okay, I've got to see this exhibition. Life is very full and busy. I'm going to give myself 45 minutes or whatever. Maybe I'm here over lunch or something. And what I what I'm always surprised by is how, once you're in it, for me anyway, it's usually quite transcendent. It's like that feeling, that hurriedness will melt away. How about
Yeah,
you?
yeah, yeah. I think what surprised me the most was the feeling that I always had, but that was more kind of like a theoretical or an ethical stance of unreliability of liking or disliking something.
Mm,
And because we have to put ourselves in the research mode and trying to do a sort of an expose about the artists that we talk about, it always brings me to a point where I'm like, I'm making myself available for this work.
mm,
And if I don't connect to it, I may connect later,
mm,
but I do have a sense of where these people are coming from, and the work that is being made is there in a genuine effort to connect to themselves and to the audience. It has surprised me how much I enjoy being open, and even sometimes going against what I very naturally and viscerally feel when I visit an exhibition. I studied art criticism. I read all the Clement Greenbergs and the Lucy Lepards and all of those art critics, and how art criticism was about how this artist has it or doesn't, how they understood the zeitgeist or they didn't, how they failed miserably, like, when Guston started doing his kind
yeah.
of like comics oriented imagery, and how everyone's like, he's lost the plot.
Yeah.
And now that's why healing is coming into place, because we know that art is not it's not marketing, it's not a sort of competition to see the artist that gets it better, because whatever the it is up for grabs. Who knows what art is doing, who knows what it's there for, and who knows why we do it. And the reality is there's more and more artists and more space for art in our society now. Like, we're reconnecting to prehistoric times where people went into caves and were like, yeah, let's just do a mammoth.
Yeah.
We don't eat them, but let's just draw them, and let's just do some codes, some stuff that means something, that kind of resembles the words we use in our mouths. And let's just like let go and do stuff
Hmm.
in these on these walls and these tablets that we're making of clay, and then and and that these vases are look so empty, let's just put some indents into them, and and we're making space for that, and that's really amazing. And who am I to just go and say that's crap, that's
Yeah.
bullshit,
Yeah.
unless I think that there's always, you can never be, there's always something. Unless I see that there's a trend that I feel it's completely empty, but I don't think we would do an episode on one of those exhibitions. I don't think that would
Yeah.
be very helpful because there's a lot of trendiness, supported by a market, and that's, and I'm not very interested in going in there. And also, who am I again to say? Maybe one of those artists that I find is responding to a certain trend may just grow and become like this amazing creative force. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was the biggest surprise.
I remember noticing that about you very early on when we would see art. It was just your openness to being like, look, this is their art. Let's not think about it in terms of good or bad or what they should have done or this silly or not silly or whatever. But, just the fact that you just were looking at it objectively and subjectively, but not in a way that was there to tear it down. I remember some of the early, times of going to galleries and just be like,
Mm.
"Hey, I'm going here to this thing. You want to come?" And I'd come and not know anything about and just be, in my sort of, kind of Luddite, sort of new to art way, be like, I don't know if I get this. And you'd be like, well, like, this is what they were doing, and this is why it was new at the time, and da da da. And that way that you have of being with art, I think, is really special because it's not the binary good, bad, this, that, but is part of what I think, certainly brought me in deeper.
I don't really care about technique. I don't find that's very important. I think that was one of the big problems with classicism, and you know and also why some artists were completely discarded. At some point Botticelli was horrible. You could not look at Botticelli, or you could not look at Chagall, or you cannot, and then suddenly it's like, oh, there's amazing art, because whatever the parameters were for a good technique or a bad technique changed and shifted. And that's not what moves you, because the thing is, when you look at children's drawings, they're
Mm,
perfect
mm,
always. Like, you could
mm,
have a museum of every family's children's drawings, and it would just fill your heart with joy. I mean, it's just amazing and perfect. And they don't have any particular, I mean, they have their own techniques, they develop their own idiosyncrasies, and they are taught at school, like to hold a pencil like this, or to hold, but then they develop their own way of doing things. And I think that's the thing. If you get to that place, I don't care if your technique's not good.
right.
You can sense that there's a genuine intentionality, there's a presence there, and that's what counts
Mm,
for me. I really, some people are like, oh, Picasso was such good. I really, that does not speak to me at all. I don't care about it. It's not what draws me to an artwork, for sure.
mm.
There is knowledge, though, there is skill, but I think that the artist develops their own skill.
One of the other things that I have loved and has surprised me about this podcast is just the listeners. I mean, they are coming in from all over. You can see that the moment a new episode drops, it'll be like people in South Korea have picked it up, and it's, that has just
Yeah.
been such a joy to see. Or, all over Southeast Asia and Europe, and kind of, I don't know, I guess areas I might not have expected to be, kind of natural listenerships. And the questions that you put on Instagram and the answers that we get have been such a joy and have led to so many discoveries of my own, of, exhibitions or artists that, I hadn't heard of, that are, have just been great to be exposed to. So I love the fact that there's so many ideas and so much energy coming in from the listeners. That's been great.
So this first episode is to just for you to get reacquainted with us, or maybe to get to know us for the first time. Maybe you're a first listener and you just have a conversation between two people about art. From here on, during the second season, we will be doing episodes about exhibitions in London. And boy, are there exhibitions in London for you to look forward to. So if you can't make it to London, we're here for you. If you can, we'll be doing some episodes about these amazing shows. So the first one is going to be Tracy Emin at White Cube. So that's the first episode we have after this one prepared. The second or the third one, I think it's going to be the second, is another feature of the Curve space at the Barbican with Pamela Fatsimo Sundstrom. And finally, so we have lined up 3 episodes. So if you have suggestions for the following ones, by all means, please reach out to us.
That would be great.
The third one, that would be nice. I mean, we love to hear from you. And the third one is going to be a biggie, Mike Kelly at the Tate Modern. So 3 episodes lined up that you can look forward to. And we look forward to sharing them with you.
Absolutely.
This is a wrap. Thank you so much. Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, this has been great. Yeah, and thank you. I mean, it's just been, it's been really nice to look back at the first season and think about the terrain that we have traversed in the art world in London. And just for me personally, and just my own relationship with art and, the relationship with the listeners and hearing, what they see and what they feel and what they hear and what they're interested in. And it's just been such a joy. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Emily. And we'll see you very, very, very soon. Take care.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.